It's Nick Cherkus. It's very nice to see you all and to meet a lot of you, and to join in with your enthusiasm and the work that you've been doing this morning. My day job is I represent Oxford University Press in North Africa, in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me to be with you this morning. And it's a huge pleasure on my part. I have the rather unenviable slot of speaking just before people go to lunch, which has its advantages because it means that fewer people fall asleep because everyone's hungry. But it has its disadvantages because everyone starts thinking about lunch as well. So I will try to kind of squeeze through. I'm very happy to share these slides with anybody. So if you want to get a copy of these slides, you can either, I'll put my email address there, send me a quick message. I'm very happy to send them to you. And you're also obviously welcome to take videos and photos of these as well. So yes, and I'm really pleased that we've just had this wonderful presentation by Professor Ben Hamdouche as well. And I'm even more pleased because a lot of what you were referring to links directly into what we're going to be looking at here, which is absolutely brilliant. So this keyword here, I guess, multimodal literacy. It's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Multimodal literacy. Multimodal. Is this a term, literacy, this is a term that we all know, I think. Multimodal, is this a term that you've seen before?
No, we're not familiar.
I wasn't familiar with it until about 3 months ago, when I started looking into it, and I found it quite interesting, and it links perfectly to the topics and the themes of what you're talking about here, and also, as I said, to Professor Ben Hamdouche's presentation that we've just had as well. So we're going to take a quick look at what that means. All of the information we're going to see comes from a research paper that has been produced by Oxford University Press called Multimodality in ELT. You can try that. I've tested that QR code. It works for me. But there's also the link there, or you can just literally Google that title and you'll be able to find it. You can download this for free along with all the other research papers that OUP has done. So Oxford University Press carries out a huge amount of research by people a lot cleverer than me that leads directly into our materials, our course books, and our learning tools. So all research about how we learn English and how we teach English that kind of guides our learning resources. If that doesn't work for you, like I say, just Google that title, Multimodality in ELT, or contact me and say, where can I find it, and I'll send you the link. So we're going to take a quick look at what we mean by this multimodal. Why is it important? Why am I telling you about it? How is it used in classrooms as well? And I hope that by the end of this you'll have a new idea that you can take into your learning and eventually into your teaching as well. And I think that this is like any great innovation in English language teaching. This is not like a revolution. It's not something that is completely different and is going to turn the whole English language teaching world upside down. It's really focusing on an area of teaching or learning and realizing why it's important and how we can use more of it. Okay. Similar to critical thinking, a few years ago, critical thinking would have been kind of, critical thinking is not a new thing. People have been doing that for thousands of years, but it's nowadays that we realize its importance in education, and so it's very important to focus on it. Okay. Multimodal. So in the last presentation, we looked at different types of text, didn't we? The different types of text we might read. So what did we see? We saw a book, didn't we? Signs. A job application, yeah. Poetry, science.
Application dictionary.
Lots and lots, yeah. So if I get you to think quickly, now, Unrelated question. Someone did some research, again, someone very clever, did some research about teachers and when teachers ask questions. And they looked at the amount of time that teachers gave their students before they got a response from students. What do you think is the average amount of time that a teacher gives their students before they tell the students the answer?
5 seconds.
It's less than 5 seconds. It's less than 3 seconds. The average amount of time is less than 1 second, apparently. So we don't often give our students a lot of time to think about their response. So I'll get you to think now. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to count down from 5. I don't want you to give me the answer. Okay? Don't shout your answer out. Don't teacher. I just want you to think what your response is. So I want you to think about, so before coming here this morning, before starting this morning, what was the last thing that you read? And what was the last thing that you listened to? The last thing that you read and the last thing that you listened to. When we're thinking about something you listen to, I'm not talking about conversations with people. So if I give you my answers, before coming here today, the last thing I read was the sign on the Complexe Culturel here, so I knew I was in the right place. And the last thing I listened to was the sports report on the radio as I was driving here. And I was very sad because it concerns my favourite football team who didn't do very well last night. I know. Yes, exactly. Yes, I know. Very sad. So that was me. That was the last thing I read, the last thing I listened to. So I'm going to count down from 5. I want you to think about that answer for yourself. So 5. And then I just want you to say hello to somebody sitting next to you and to share your answers. Oh, nice. For reading and for listening. And the idea by multimodality brings that in. So if we think about language skills, traditionally we've got our 4 language skills, listening, reading, speaking, writing. Okay? And we can, one of the parts of critical thinking we were just looking at was categorizing things, putting things into categories. So if I want to put these into categories, we could have like spoken skills that involve our vocal cords, and writing skills that involve writing. We could have receptive skills and productive. Okay, yep. So we can categorize those in different ways. Okay. And traditionally in English language teaching, we very much focused on these 4 language skills. But if we think about those text types that you've just been talking about, so the last things you read and the last things you listened to, we're going beyond these skills. And the idea of multimodality is that we're looking at the changing nature of communication. So looking at these images here, a lot of these are what you kind of refer to. We've got people reading things on their phones. We have I'm just going to borrow this because, Professor Hendrich referred to, there we go, the program, and a few of you mentioned the program as well. So what does this tell us? Communication is changing. And the way that our students, and indeed ourselves, communicate goes beyond those 4 language skills that we've just seen. Here's a little quote that comes from that research paper. So if your eyes are like mine at the back of the room, you probably can't see this, so I'm going to apologize. I'm going to read it out. In the current communication environment, written and spoken texts are being replaced as the principal mode of communication by a combination of text and still and moving images that we view on screens. Okay. Now, a little caveat here as well is that the aim of this talk is not to judge which modes of communication are superior to others. Okay, one of my biggest pleasures in life is sitting with a book and turning off my phones and computer and all digital devices and sitting and reading a book. Absolutely love it. But what this is looking at is the reality is that the majority of our communication nowadays, whether it's receptive or productive, is through a variety of different modes of communication that go beyond those 4 language skills that we've just seen. So when we think about these modes of communication, there's a nice little pie chart here. So we're looking at 5 different modes of communication, 5 different ways of communicating. Linguistic, visual, oral, gestural, and spatial. Okay. Just to give you a guideline on what we mean by that. So linguistic mode, the meaning of written or spoken language in communication. So this is when we're looking at the choice of words, we're looking at how it's organized, we're looking at the grammar, we're probably looking at the register as well. But this is one aspect of communication that obviously is key. And the next one is visual. So what can be seen by the viewer? Images, symbols, signs we mentioned as well, videos, visual design, font type, font style, font size. A few of you mentioned the program here, so just by, why do we have these parts here in a bigger size font than this part here? It's catchy. Yeah, it's catchy. Oh, what is this? Oh, I see. It's a conference organised by the Higher School of Education. Oh, okay, fantastic. Okay, and the minor points in smaller font because we can search for those in more detail. So this is all part of the visual mode of communication. Or also what we can hear. We mentioned podcasts. So it's not just the word, the language that we can hear in the podcast, but also how it's paced, if there are any other sounds, any sound effects, any music in the podcast, if there are any little ding sections that show that we're moving from one section to another. So everything we can that can be heard by the listener goes into that oral mode. Gestural, this is very important in Morocco, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
My Darija is like A1 level, but I can understand pretty much everything. It's quite, because, you can. So communication through movement. So we tend to think this is just about face-to-face communication, but it's actually, there's a lot more gestural, of the gestural mode in all communication types as well. And finally, spatial. So this is an interesting one. The meaning of communication through physical layout. Position, spacing, the distance between elements in and around the text. So the fact that on this program, all of this is nicely centered. It's not all in random places all over the text. It's right in the middle, so I know that that's the most important part. It's easy to read because it's nicely centered. This all comes into that spatial mode of communication. Okay. So, as I say, this is not revolutionary. We're not trying to turn things on their head and change the way that we go about teaching English, but we are focusing on areas that I think are traditionally less focused on, but are absolutely vital for communication. Let's look at some examples of these. So we've got these little icons, here. So remind me, which of those modes do these refer to? So the first one here is the linguistic, and then we've got visual, oral, gestural, yeah, and very good. I was trying to think of a nice little, mnemonic to remember those, but the letters don't really match up very well. Anyway, here we go. So this is we're going to look at some examples. So this is a photograph. This is actually the Oxford University Press head office in Oxford. Ooh, it's very nice, isn't it? So as we can see, this is a photograph. We're only really focusing on the visual mode of communication here. Okay, there is some writing there. It actually says Oxford University Press, if your eyes are very good, which mine aren't. But we don't need, if there's no writing there, the effect that the photograph has on us is still quite similar. Okay, so we're only focusing on the visual mode there. Here's a paragraph. Gosh, we don't need to read that, by the way. But there we go. So there we're just focusing on that linguistic mode. So when I'm sitting, sitting at home with my phone off and in peace and quiet reading my book, I'm only really focusing on the linguistic mode. There's no more modes of communication involved in that. The only way I'm absorbing that information is through that linguistic mode. Oh, here we go. So this is the page of a textbook. Okay, you don't need to be able to read all the text. That's not the aim of showing you this. Okay, but when we look at this, we know it looks like a textbook. Yeah, and as we can see, there's those three modes there that are at play. So we've obviously got the linguistic mode because we've got text that we're reading, but we've got that visual mode because we've got an image there that is referring to whatever the text is telling us about. And what about, how does the spatial mode come into play? Yeah, exactly. Where is there going to be white space? Where is there going to be blank space? It's quite interesting. Whenever they're designing course books, they often ask people like me for our feedback on, what's the appropriate amount of space to put on the book. So they'll send me like this image, and then they'll send me an image where the text is slightly bigger. And they'll say, ask me which one works best for people in Morocco, for example. So they really think about how they space things out. And if we compare that, if we go back, there we go. So here we don't really include the spatial mode because that's just a block of text that we have to read. Here it's been specifically designed. And again, going back to that spatial mode here, that's really important here because there's this blank space, but because there's blank space, it makes it easier to focus on the important information. Okay. Oh, a meme. Here we go. There we go. It doesn't. The image of the cat. You might have seen this one. The image of the cat doesn't come out too well, but the cat is. How does the cat feel? Very proud, yes, exactly. Very smug, perhaps, yeah. So memes are really interesting here because this is so much of communication happens through this. On WhatsApp groups, sometimes you can just put a meme in and it will say much more than if you wrote a whole paragraph. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason why we say a picture says 1,000 words. Because look at the modes that are going on here. So we've got, obviously there's linguistic because there are words. Visual because we're looking at the cat and the cat's expression and we're linking the words to the expression on the cat's face and to the picture. We've also got the gestural mode there because we know from looking at the cat that the cat feels proud, smug. And that's the kind of gesture that we're aiming to convey here. And we've got the spatial mode because it's designed to be read in two parts, isn't it? That's why there's the first part at the top, the second part at the bottom. And we look at this. How do we know that this is a meme? How do we know that it's a meme and not a postcard?
Funny.
It's funny? We can relate, but let's think about, again, going to descriptions and interpretation. Those are interpretations. What's a description of this that tells us that it is a meme?
The picture of the cat.
No, it could just be a picture of a cat. It could just be a picture of a cat. There's something about the writing. Traits. Somewhat. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so memes tend to have this kind of type font, don't they? So it's capital letters, but quite big blocks. So when you're scrolling through, it jumps out at you, and it's very easy to read. You can read it in a second. You can get the meaning really, really quickly. So memes are fantastic for students as well. I've seen loads of great activities where a teacher's taken the text and separated it from the pictures and they have to match them together. I've seen loads of great activities where the teachers get the students to bring in their own photos and then make them into memes by making funny captions. So lots of fun things we can do. A YouTube page. Gosh, look at all this. Look at all the modes of communication there. Again, the aim of showing you this is not so you can read every word. I'm standing here and I can't read it. But the point is, on a YouTube page, look, we've got linguistic, because we're probably going to be looking at the comments. We're probably going to be reading captions. I don't know about you, but every time I put Netflix on, I put the subtitles on. It doesn't matter what language it is, always. Just so I can hear what's going on. Obviously visual, because we're watching something. Obviously oral, because we're listening to something as well. Gestural, because we're probably, I mean, this is actually a still of a YouTube video that is actually a webinar. So when we're watching a webinar, we're still interacting with the speaker, because we're watching their gestures, we're watching their body language as well. And again, spatial, because of the way that this is set out. This is very deliberate. It's not random that it's set out like this. YouTube has set up the page like this to get us watching more videos, because they want us to be consuming as much content as we can. So there's lots of spatial mode going on as well. Okay. Is that the last example? Oh, no, it's not. There we go, podcast. So podcast, we've got linguistic and we've got oral as well. And as we said, when in a podcast, very, very often, there's going to be not just the words that we're listening to, but we're getting a lot out of the intonation of the speakers. We also know that when they're going to be coming to an end, when they're going to be moving to a new section. They may have sound effects, music in there as well. And, oh, look at that. That's a podcast cover art. This comes from an OUP podcast called Talking ELT, which is very good. So this is the cover art. So we know what the podcast is about. Again, we've got all of the modes of communication there except for the oral mode, because it's just the cover. We've got visuals, we've got linguistic, we've got spatial, we've got, why have we got gestural? I have to look at my notes, because there is a reason why. Oh, that's right, because you can't actually see very well, but there is, behind the picture, there's actually like a very soft image of people talking. So we can see the people there. It doesn't come out much on the screen. So we can ignore the gesture of that one, maybe. Anyway, so those are our 5 modes of communication. And what we find is that nowadays, communication, as I said, has moved beyond simply that linguistic. The way that our students, and indeed ourselves, now access information, the way that we communicate information as well, increasingly relies on us being able to maximize our proficiency in these different modes of communication. Okay. So, in traditional English language teaching, however, we are still very much looking at those 4 language skills: listening, speaking, reading, writing. We're sometimes teaching them in isolation, and so there's a gap, basically, between what's frequently done in the classroom and the way that the language is used in our students' day-to-day lives. So, multimodal literacy. What do we mean by that? So we're talking here about our students' ability, to understand and to respond to multimodal texts. So when we talk about texts that feature one or more of those 5 modes of communication, we want our students to be able to understand them, we want our students to be able to respond to them, and we also want our students to be able to create them themselves. So we've got 2 kinds of different skills there. We've got viewing multimodal texts and representing multimodal texts. So, why this is important, as we just said, most of the texts that our learners are going to be accessing outside the classroom are multimodal. They feature a variety of the different modes of communication, as you gave from the examples when I asked you about the last text that you read and listened to. But it's not enough to be able to understand those. We need to understand how these interact with written language, how they interact with spoken language. I think the idea of different registers and appropriacy comes in as well. it's great fun to do activities involving memes with your students, but if your student goes into an exam and writes a meme, it's not going to have the right effect. So students need to know about appropriacy as well, and when these different modes of communication are used, and how they can communicate information and ideas through them. Okay, I'm going to squidge through a little bit. There we go. So how can we implement this in our classrooms? And again, going back to Professor Ben Hamdouche's presentation, thinking about critical thinking, and we spoke a lot about the kind of that initial emotional link, both to culture and to the content of what's done in the classroom. This is a model called the 4 E's: encountering, exploring, evaluating, and expressing. So this is ways that we can get students to respond to different texts in the classroom. So if we have the example of a film, we're talking about a film that I know that the students have all watched. The first step is encountering it. We're focusing on their emotional engagement with this text. So got some questions there. What's happening in the film? What's your immediate reaction to it? How does it make you feel? Does it bring any memories to mind, or any life experiences? Exploring focuses on their cognitive understanding. So we've got those similar kind of questions here. What happens in the beginning, middle, and the end? Which is your favorite character and why? What clues are there to tell us whether the film is set now or in the past? So again, we've got that interpretation and description. Evaluating. So getting back to that critical thinking about those critical perspectives. How would you summarize the message of the film? What values are being suggested by its creator? Who's the intended audience? Who is it being made for? Who would you recommend it to and why? And then final stage, expressing. So this is where we think about those modes of communication, bringing them together into one product that the students can make. Write a multimodal review. So a multimodal review could be not just involving pen and paper. It could be involving other forms of media. It could be involving video. It could be an oral review. It could be a reenactment. It could be making images, making a comic strip, a manga review. We'll get back to that in a minute, but just on that as well, I think that's what really interested me most about this multimodality, because I'm really, I would say, almost obsessed by the idea that all students have potential and all students have something that they excel in. And so if we're thinking about multimodality, and especially about expressing, so creating something multimodal, there's jobs that all students can do. So all students can be involved, regardless of their level, regardless of their ability, regardless of their interests as well. I'm going to skip through this. Here we go. And this is digital storytelling. So again, this was referred to in Professor Ben Hamdouche's presentation. So ways that we can get students to tell a story, give some information, to create something, to create an output, something that is going to tell people about something. And as you'll see from the steps that we would do this in the classroom, so we've seen that film review. My students have all watched a film. I want them to create a multimodal film review, for example. First of all, they're going to get their ideas and do their research. They're going to write a script. They're probably going to maybe peer check it. They're going to edit it. They're going to rewrite it. They're going to create a storyboard. They're going to gather the media or even create the media, so make their videos. They're going to find their sources for this, put it all together into one package, and then share it, either presenting it live or putting it on a learning management system, or putting it on making a YouTube video, or sharing it on social media or whatever, and then to reflect on each other's. So again, this is not groundbreaking. This is something that I've done hundreds of times, just using pen and paper with students. These stages of creating something that they're going to present to other students. But the difference here is that we're really focusing on those different modes of communication, how they all fit together. Another nice little quote. We need to help learners read and listen around the text so they see how the context impacts on what they understand. And this is what I think a focus on multimodality can really help with, because it gets students really thinking about the way that we communicate and the way those modes of communication, linguistic, visual, oral, gestural, spatial, all work together and complement each other. So, our 5 modes of communication, as we saw earlier. So our linguistic, visual, oral, gestural, and spatial. These are all essential parts of communication. As I say, this is nothing new. We've known this for thousands of years, but what we're looking at here is how these can complement each other and help students to not just develop their understanding of text that they're going to come across, but also to help them in their own creative process. A few conclusions are there. So, as we saw, communication today is about much more than just speaking and writing. All of us every day interact with a huge variety of different text types, many of which feature all or some or most of these different modes of communication. So it's really important in our classes that we include viewing these texts and also give students an opportunity to create them as well. The third conclusion there, using videos and images in class isn't an optional fun activity anymore. A little caveat with that, because as you probably know, I travel all around North Africa visiting schools. And I know very well that in many schools, even private schools, there is not a projector in the classroom. There's not a way to project images. That doesn't mean that we can't refer to them, because all students know about images, they know about videos. I've seen some great activities where teachers in classrooms that don't have a projector have asked students about a film they've all seen. Oh yeah, we saw that film, blah, blah, blah. Rather than watching it, what did the teacher do? Right, brilliant, I'm going to choose 2 of my confident students who I know love acting. You're going to come here and you're going to reenact this scene, and then we're going to use that as our text. Okay, so they're still using video, it's just that they don't have the technology to actually project it. Okay. So when I say using videos and images in class is an optional fun activity anymore, I don't mean that every school needs to go and buy lots of expensive equipment in order to keep up with the students. They can do, that would be great, but there are ways to incorporate this into your teaching even with minimal resources. And the last point, which is probably the most important, and again, referring back to Professor Ben Hamdouche's presentation when he spoke, that our students will be using English in the future to communicate with people from all over the world. Yep. And they will need to be proficient in this multimodal literacy in order for that communication to be effective. So it is something that I think as teachers we need to be aware of. It's kind of like the debate around AI. Whether you think AI is a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's evil or whether it's a force for good, whether it's going to destroy the world or whether it's going to liberate the world, that's kind of irrelevant, because what we need is to realize that it is now a reality in our world, and we need to be on top of it and to understand it in the same way that our students will need to understand it in the future. As I said, this is not something that is revolutionary, groundbreaking. It's looking at what we already know in a different light. And I think the most important thing is that last point. If students need to be proficient in this multimodal literacy, it's our duty as teachers to give them opportunities that they can practice it and that they can prepare for it in their classes as well. So, as I said, all of this information comes from this research paper. There's that QR code again and the web link. If you can't find it, please don't hesitate to contact me. That's my email address, so please feel free to send me an email. Thank you very much. This is just... I attended a similar session to this, as I said, about 3 months ago, and I didn't really take a lot of it in. I went away and read that research paper. I did a little bit more research, and I understood a lot more about what this was trying to convey. So I would encourage you to do the same thing as well. Have a look at that research paper. Think about how this is important for your teaching and for your students in the future. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you think of any questions, or if you want me to share the slides with you as well. Be very happy to. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is there anything you'd like to add, to share, okay? It's a safe space. Feel free to yes, good. Our first speakers to join in order to be able to answer the questions.
Sure thing. Okay. I'll put that away before I forget it.